Alisha, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
I am so excited to be here and chat with you. I love what you're doing with this, and I just can't wait to learn more about you and share more about me and the book.
Yes. So I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So many different things, I think. My earliest memory, I did you had to do something for my kindergarten class. I still have it, that you put things about yourself up on the wall
Oh,
in a star. And so I put like a picture of my family. My favorite food was pizza. And I put, for what do you want to be when you grow up? I put a picture of Ronald Reagan because I wanted to be president, and he was president at the time. So when I was really little, I just thought that was like a very obvious thing. I enjoy bossing people around. It seemed like a job with a lot of power. So that was probably my earliest career ambition, although I'm not sure it lasted very long. But that's the earliest documented career ambition.
Well, tell me, how do you think that relates to what you do today, or how it connects?
It's such an interesting question because I think it connects very well to what I sort of had been doing up until the point that I sort of kind of walked away, at least what I thought was going to be temporarily, from my job as CEO to go and try my hand at all of these unpaid internships. But I think that I always kind of had this drive and desire to really be the best and to achieve all of the things that I had set out to achieve. You know, I grew up the daughter of an immigrant to the US. I think this is like a very common story for a lot of people. My dad was Cuban. They had left without anything, shirts on their backs. And so education and achievement, this was like the thing that I was here to do. My dad's family had sacrificed so much for me to be able to be here and doing all of these things. And so it was probably some combination of like internal or external pressure. But so I always found myself very ambitious, always wanting to do well, always wanting to be the best, and kind of gravitating to these leadership positions, even when I was as early as 5, thinking I wanted to be Ronald Reagan. And so that's what I did. That's what I did for a long time. I just pushed and pushed and pushed constantly to continue climbing the ladder, get a better job, make more money. Eventually, I joined the firm that my husband and I had set up, and I took over as CEO. And so at that point, I was sort of like the president of my little world that I was kind of in. And so that was very, very much connected. And I think that suited me really well for a long time until the point at which it didn't really.
Yes. So tell us about that.
So kind of early 2019, as a matter of fact, what I consider like the start date for my project was exactly 4 years ago today. Thank goodness for iPhones.
I saw your post.
I know. Like when it'll like send you a picture that comes up, I'm like, oh my God, this is very thematically appropriate. But I was on this kind of just wonderful girls' weekend with 2 of my best friends from college, and they both had very, very young kids. My twins were 8 at the time, and all of us collectively have done a lot in our careers and with our lives. But I think the more cocktails we had, the more we started to kind of open up and chat and really just think, are we doing exactly what we want to be doing? And I sort of floated this idea by them that weekend that was coming off the back of a long period of feeling like I had checked all those boxes off. I had done the things that I set out to do, that I set out to achieve. I had made my dad proud, like tick, tick, tick. And I was feeling really unhappy, kind of empty, unsatisfied, very guilty that I wasn't just there appreciating kind of what I was doing and what I had, and feeling just, was this it? Like I'm about to turn 40, and are there no more things for me left to achieve? There's no more for me to do. Is this just going to be what it's like? And it wasn't so bad, admittedly, but I think emotionally I felt very stuck. So I threw this idea out there and I said, you know what, if I could do anything, I would go and be an intern on Broadway. I would get coffee for people. I would fold playbills. I would pick up gum. I would do anything to be part of that process, that creative process, and to see what it was like to put on a show. And so that conversation then sort of evolved, and I still have a list of all the original ideas we came up with, which was like a producer on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or a farmer, all of these random internships that we said we were going to do. And we kind of left that weekend, and it was just this sort of fantastical idea in my head. But as time went on, I decided, actually, this is something I really want to pursue. I want to take a little break from my career. I think I need something to kind of jumpstart my motivation to feel more like myself. And so I decided to set out this beautiful, neatly laid out year-long plan to go take internships at the jobs I wanted to do when I was a kid. I was going to do 5 of them, and all of this was going to happen in 2020. And then everything went exactly as planned.
Of course.
We all lived happily ever after the end.
Yeah. Well, I want to back up a little, Alicia. I want to kind of dig into a little bit more of what you just said. You said you were emotionally stuck.
Right. I had children. I had mortgage payments. I had, we're still paying off my husband's student loans. There were a lot of practical, and I had a life where a lot of people depended on me, right? So I was volunteer. I was the parent coordinator at the school, and I was serving on some nonprofit boards, and I was running this company where people's jobs depended on me and our family's livelihood depended on me. So those were all legitimate, practical things that I needed to work out. Emotionally, though, things felt very much the same. It felt like, I was very, very comfortable in what I was doing. I started to sort of notice that I would walk into a room and be the person that knew the most about the thing that I was supposed to know about. And in some ways, that's a great feeling, to feel so confident in yourself and your abilities that you've reached that kind of pinnacle. But the flip side of that was that I did not feel like I was learning anything anymore. I felt like I was doing the same sorts of things, like I wasn't being challenged or stimulated. And as someone who has always loved learning, it was a kind of shock to realize that I had gotten to that point and that I wasn't really learning anymore. And then definitely there was like a left brain, right brain thing, as you kind of rightly so called out. I think my job was very strategic, very practical. It was consulting. It was business oriented. It was helping clients solve their problems. And I had always, I've written a book now that's required me to think a lot about the reasons why these things have happened. Kind of like free therapy, writing a book. But, I think for so long, I had focused on that side of things, the analytical sort of left brain, not really artistic, not really creative side of things. And there were all these parts of me that I realized that I had in my past that I never seriously considered as careers, or they just didn't seem like the thing that was going to get me to the next box I needed to tick off, the next place I needed to be on the ladder. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that almost all of the internships that I ended up doing, because I did manage to get 4 done in spite of the pandemic, were in creative fields or had a creative element to them, because that artistic sort of right brain, no rules, no neat boxes, a little bit messy side of things, I had just abandoned for like a long time.
Yeah, no, I can hear that in your voice. When you're talking about wanting to decide to make that change in your life, taking those 4 internships, how difficult was that for you in preparing for this interview? I read you went to Harvard, just mentioned you're the daughter of an immigrant. I imagine that must have been difficult after you've achieved so much to leave that, to try something new.
It felt impossible, really, for a very long time. And I think it took me really 8 or 9 months to get from the point of having this initial idea to actually making a decision that I was going to do this. It almost sounds like I was like, I decided I was going to do it, and then I was going to do it. No, that's not what happened at all. I thought I had the idea. I was like, this would be fun. And then I immediately thought of like 1,000 reasons why I could never do it. Then I would think, oh gosh, but maybe I should just try. Maybe I'll just look at my resume and, make it intern appropriate. And then I would do that. And then I would spend like another 2 weeks being like, this is so stupid. I can't believe I'm wasting time on this. How could I be doing this? It was extremely difficult. I have always been somebody who doesn't like to let people down. And I was really worried that I was going to be letting people down. But I think I had kind of convinced myself that I wasn't necessarily making this huge life change. The way that I sold it to myself eventually was like, I'm going to take these small mini sabbaticals, I call them to people, I'm going to take a month or 6 weeks off at a time. I'm going to go do this internship. Then I'm going to come back for a bit. I'm going to do another one. I'm going to come back. And then when it's all done, I bet I'm going to feel refreshed and wonderful and ready to just get back on the same path that I was on. And so, don't worry, everybody. Like, this is just a little break. I'm going to come back in. And I think it's like I wasn't really ready to acknowledge that I needed to make the kind of change I needed to make into my career until I was pretty much at the end of my 4th internship when I finally got to the point where I thought, actually, I can't just go back. I can't just go back and do the same thing. And so it did. I was worried about telling people about it. I got nervous if people would say, oh no, here are all these reasons why this is a bad idea. And I'd be like, oh, okay, you're probably right. I'm gonna just drop this idea now. And it took a really, really long time until I got to the point where I felt like the reasons for not doing it, or rather, I felt like the risk of not doing it was greater than the risk of doing it because I felt so unable to move forward in so many different areas of my life. I felt like if I didn't do this, it would be so much worse than all of the things that I imagined were going to happen if I did.
Well, and you mentioned earlier the practicality of the beanstalk. You said there's mortgage payments, there's school debt, you're the CEO. How did you work through that in your mind? I know you said, okay, this is just a mini sabbatical, but those things didn't go away. And I'm sure someone's listening and thinking, that's really cool. How did you think through that? How did you solve through that? How did you get unstuck?
Well, I'm sure I made a spreadsheet, at least one, maybe 5. It took a lot of negotiating, a lot of moving pieces around.
Negotiating with yourself or
with myself, with my husband, who was going to have to take on primary care responsibilities for my children for the period that I was going to be gone. Negotiating with people where I had made commitments and sometimes was doing this for a long time. So like, for example, I was the representative on the school parent council and I had been doing that since my kids were 3 every year. So when I said I'm going to have to step down after doing this job for, 5 years, they're like, no, just no, you can't. You can possibly. Don't worry. You can take a month off and then come back and do it. So negotiating with things like that, figuring out how we were going to still manage the business without me being there. So deputizing was very, very important. I had not historically been very good at delegating things to other people. And I think especially when it's your business, you feel a real sense of not just actual ownership, but emotional ownership over it. And so it was a lot of work. And I had a really great coach at the time who was, if I would say, well, I would need to keep this client. Even if I'm off on this internship in New York, folding playbills, I would still need to keep this client. I couldn't hand them over to somebody else. And she would say, why? Why do you think that? What exactly are you doing for them that nobody else could possibly do? And so really thinking through how could I parcel out my work to other members of my team on a temporary basis? And how was I going to transition that? That was a big part of it as well. And so just thinking about all those different areas and elements of our life. Then COVID happened. And so 2.5 weeks into my first great adventure in New York, having the time of my life, sitting in on these musical rehearsals and generally thinking I was like the luckiest person alive, the entire world shut down. I had to rush home. My kids are out of school. Everybody's kids are out of school. Everyone is panicking. And I had to step back in. I had to figure out how to help steer the ship. And obviously, financially, that was also a very challenging year for a lot of businesses. So all of a sudden, this business that we had built over so much time that was doing really well enough to support me taking this time off, I had to go back in and be like, is this still going to be feasible? Can we still make this work? So it was not a sort of simple exercise, but I think I am a person who does, in spite of all my new efforts to try to be more right-brained, like I work well in spreadsheets, I work well in columns and rows. And it was a lot of kind of listing out every possible thing that needed to be worked on, every person I needed to tell, everything that needed to be negotiated, and having a plan for each and every one. Then, of course, all the plans got thrown out the window when COVID happened, but I did have a plan before I left.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that, because I think sometimes we can imagine, oh, somebody left to do something really cool and just kind of threw caution to the wind or whatever that saying is.
Yes.
And
I'm such a risk-averse person in my life. I think it's important that people know that when they read this book and I have a podcast as well. It's called Quit Your Day Job. And I interview a lot of people who have also made career pivots and done different things. And what I hear from 9 out of 10 of them, if not more, and was also the case with me, was that it wasn't a huge jump without a safety net. That requires, you have to have an incredible, and I came to this with a lot of privilege already in my life, but I couldn't imagine, I did not just quit my job and walk away. when I was in New York, I was still up every morning at 6 a.m. making sure I could do at least 2 or 3 hours of emails before I was heading off to my internship. When I eventually did decide to leave the firm, step back as CEO and continue on as chair and put in a new CEO, that was a 12-month transition on top of the transition that already happened. So, and I hear this from a lot of people as well. I did this as a side hustle for a little while before I took it over as my full-time job. And I think there is nothing wrong or somehow like you're less brave than not deciding to just throw caution to the wind and dive in head first. Sometimes that works. And for some people that works, but also sometimes it works to line your two things up. You put in a little bit of extra work at the beginning, but making sure you have a plan, you have a safety net, you know what you're doing, and then you make that change that you want to make in your life. And certainly that is much more my approach. Now, my husband is like a very much less risk averse than me. So he would just probably be like, I'm just going to go and do this thing. And that's why we're a good team, because I'm like, you couldn't possibly do this thing. There are 45 reasons why you should not. And eventually we land somewhere in the middle. But I think there's more than one way to make a pivot. There's more than one way to make a change. And no one is saying you've got to go 180 degrees all at once. Maybe you go 10 or 20 degrees at a time until you get where you want to be.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I also made a pivot in my life. I was an accountant and did that for 8 years in public accounting and all that. And then I pivoted to coaching, which I love. And so I love that you shared that tidbit about working with a coach. That makes my heart so happy.
Coaches are the best. It is the best. It's one of the best things I ever did for my career.
Well, and I love that you shared that you're risk averse, because someone might think, seeing the title of your book or the title of your podcast, well, maybe she's just a risk taker. So I love that you're sharing.
I love that. That's like the badass reputation I've always hoped I was going to have, but never really have managed to have.
So thank you, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are risk averse and who hear the title of your book, which is beautiful, by the way, My What If Year.
Thank you.
And say, what could be possible for me? And then think, I'm a little risk averse. I couldn't do that. And so hearing you say that is very motivating, very inspiring.
Thank you for complimenting the title, which was many, many rounds of ideas with my publishing company. Most of them were really terrible. I have a long list of all the titles that were thrown out the window, and some are very bad. But it was funny because when I started writing this as a book, or at least I would say when I started writing without thinking it was ever really going to be a book or do anything, I had this Shel Silverstein poem called The What Ifs, which is the epigraph in my book now. And Shel Silverstein was one of my favorite poets when I was growing up. And the poem is about lying in bed at night and the what ifs crawling inside your ear. And those what ifs are the really terrible ones, the ones that say, you know, what if I die in a plane crash? What if I get COVID right before I'm supposed to go on my book tour? This is my what if right now. I'm always like, oh my God, please let me not get COVID right now. The ones that really scare you. And I kind of love that the title of this book is the other flip side of the what ifs. It's the what ifs that inspire you and the what ifs that kind of excite you and push you to do something different, because you can have both sides of them. And I think I had all of those what ifs, the good ones and the bad ones, battling constantly throughout this entire process for me. And I think everybody has those in their ears. And it's very easy to let the fear-based ones drown out the other ones. But, you know, I think it's important to try to listen to both if you can.
Yeah. It makes me think of, when I read the title, it makes me think possibilities. It makes me think dreams. It makes me think playfulness, trying things, experimenting.
Yeah. Good.
I'm sure everyone's like, can't wait to hear. Tell us about the year of 4 internships. You mentioned Broadway. That seems like that was the first one. And
correct.
How did you get in the door? How did you go about whittling it down to 4? I mean, yeah, I'm just curious on that whole process.
So once I had decided, okay, I'm going to do this. This is going to be my project. I'm going to do this throughout 2020. And I want to take some time to do this. Made a list of what my dream internships would be. Things that really resonated with me because they were things besides being president that I had seriously wanted to do when I was a kid. I was really into marine biology for a while. At one point, I thought I was going to be a magazine journalist, and that was something I really wanted to do. I minored in art history and was always fascinated with the art world and thought maybe this is something I should do. And I always loved musicals. So I sort of had this list. Then I made another spreadsheet because that's just what I do. And I started to figure out everybody I knew who knew anybody to do with any of these fields. So, you know, if it was somebody I knew working in it, great. If it was somebody whose dad's cousin's brother maybe once, you know, knew somebody, That was great too. And so I started just reaching out to people and also applying for any internship that was like publicly available. And almost nobody wrote me back. Very few people wrote me back. I wrote what I thought was a very good cover letter explaining, I've done all these things. I'm a CEO, but actually I really want to pursue these other passions and I don't need to be paid, but I understand this is a very unorthodox request. And like nobody wrote me back at all. So I did not have a lot of success in spite of the fact that I had a very good resume, but I continued to work my network, meet people for coffee that had anything to do with any of the fields that I was interested in. And eventually through connections, my musical theater internship was the first one. And that was organized for me by one of my best friend's fathers who works in musical theater. He's a very talented writer. And he introduced me to two friends of his who were directing shows that were in rehearsals and going to open in the spring of 2020. They basically said, yep, any friend of John's is a friend of ours. And we don't know what you can do, but you can come and observe and see if you can make yourself useful kind of thing. And so I took off to New York, February 29th, 2020.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living in London. I was so convinced that everything was being blown out of proportion. But I think it was in large part because I couldn't imagine having put all this effort in and finally getting to do this thing I wanted to do so badly. And then it changing. And up until the moment where they closed all of the theaters, I still really thought this was maybe going to blow over. And I was there in New York for that really just, it's like a moment that's seared in my brain when they kind of announced that they were closing the Broadway theaters. Theaters had never closed before in kind of recent memory. I think during 9/11, I think they closed for 2 days.
Wow.
And, Broadway was closed for 18 months during the pandemic. So no one could have anticipated that. So I kind of rushed home and packed up the car with the dog and the kids and this suitcase full of black beans that my husband had been like stocking up on for the entire time that I was gone. He was like, this is what's going to help us survive a pandemic. What is better for you than black beans? We still have so many cans of black beans. We've eaten a lot of them.
You're ready. You're ready in case anything happens.
Ready. Whatever the next apocalypse is, we're totally ready. And we went up to our house on the Isle of Skye, which is a very remote part of Scotland. And we purchased like a small cottage, like a little vacation home there a few years before. And then everything kind of came crashing down and schools shut and the country went into very restrictive lockdown. My next internship that had been scheduled, which was at Christie's, the art auction house, which had been, again, set up for me by a friend of a friend who happened to send my resume over and was willing to kind of say, this woman is not crazy. She's actually going to do a good job at this thing that she wants to do.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to pause you there because as you mentioned, sending out those letters, cover letters, and no one responding. And
I just ghosted.
Yeah.
That's what the kids call it, right?
Yes, that is what the kids call it.
I haven't dated in a while, but it's definitely
it comes
ghosted.
in many forms. How was that process for you? Did you ever think maybe this isn't a good idea? Or, I imagine you had to be coming from a very open mind, humble to saying, yes, I'm a CEO. I did all these things and I've accomplished so many things, but let me intern for you. I imagine.
Get you coffee, please. I beg you.
How was that? So putting yourself out there and saying, yeah, I have this amazing resume and I want to do this. Because what I've heard and what I experienced too, as I was switching careers was, ooh, what are people going to think? I was working in this very respected field with CPAs. And so wanting to switch to coaching at first seemed scary to me. Did that ever come up for you? Or were you just so sure?
Such a good question. I mean, I had been a consultant for many, many years before that. So I was used to rejection. Like, I think I had developed a very thick skin because any job where you're selling services, you get rejected a lot. I had a pretty thick skin and I had some good experience in not taking it personally. And I think that I went into the internship hunt with the same mentality. I think one thing I learned very early in my consulting days was that a lot of times it's a numbers game. If you email 100 people, maybe 20 will write you back and maybe 10 of those will result in a coffee or meeting if you're lucky. And so I just kept thinking, all I have to do is just keep trying. I was afraid that it wouldn't happen on the timetable I wanted. I had obviously set out for myself a very strict plan, of when I wanted things to happen. Everything was organized around the kids' school breaks and things like that. I had a wonderful nanny at the time. She was quitting to go traveling. So all this stuff it all had to happen before my nanny quit. Like all of this had to happen, you know. I was worried. I'm so lucky that my husband is really the most amazing and supportive partner. And he was always there to be like, just keep trying. Email 5 more people. Email 10 more people. Go on LinkedIn again tomorrow and see who you missed. You know, very, very encouraging me not to quit. I think that I felt confident enough in my own abilities of doing a job. Like I knew I could be a good intern because I was a good intern when I was an intern 30 years before, 20 years before. I knew I wasn't going into this as a laugh. I was going into this with a really serious intention. And I know I have faith in my ability to work hard and to not stop until I pick something up. So I wasn't so worried that I wasn't going to be able to do a good job, but I did worry that it wasn't going to happen. And at that point, I felt like it so needed to happen for my mental health, for my ability to kind of move on, that's the thing that scared me the most. I wasn't so worried about what people are going to think about me. I was more worried, what if this doesn't happen? What do I do then? Like I've put all my eggs in this basket now. And this is the thing that's supposed to make me feel better about everything that's happening in life. And so I was really worried. But man, let's just say it prepared me for a career as a writer because there's so much rejection in writing as well that I think I'm now just thrown myself into things where I just get ghosted and rejected and I just have to be okay with that.
Well, I think that's a great lesson. I think I hear that over and over again. When in client conversations, I think that that's something that we don't initially think about maybe is that rejection piece and to keep trying. I had another coach who was in sales pivoting to coaching. He told me it's always a numbers game, Lupe. You have to keep trying. Just like you said, keep trying. You have to keep calling. You have to. And that really blew my mind. I thought, oh, I guess if I only reach out to 2 clients and they both say no, I guess I'm not going to, because he said, look at your conversion rate and see, you know, if you are converting 10% of your clients and you only reach out to 2 people, you're not going to have a client.
It's so true. And I think I wouldn't expect that somebody who had not done a sales job before had to think about that sort of thing. I think, but it's important to remember because it's easy to take rejection personal, especially, you know, when I was looking for these internships, I did write a very humble cover letter. And I really kind of poured my heart into that, like really making very clear that I was at a crossroads in my career, that I was really, really wanted to try these things, that I would literally do anything they asked me to do. And it was really putting myself out there. But I think you just can't take it personally and you have to keep trying to the extent that you can because eventually something will hit, you know? I may not have gotten the internships that I ended up getting, but I feel like I probably would have been able to do something. If the things that worked out hadn't worked out, I would have just tried to find another way.
I love that. So motivating. Okay, so tell us. Okay, so you're in New York City.
I'm in New York City. I rush back and under cover of night, very dramatic. And we get to Scotland with the black beans and the kids and the dog. And then they're pulled out of school. My next internship. So I had this internship set up for the spring at Christie's auction house.
Oh, yes,
contemporary team.
Yes.
I was so excited about that.
Also in New York City.
This was going to be in London. So
okay, gotcha.
Home.
Okay.
Yeah, going to be in London. Thank God. My husband was like, thank God. I didn't have to leave home for this one. And, you know, I had gone into interview there. I could not have been more excited. And a couple weeks into lockdown, I got an email saying this was going to be indefinitely postponed, you know, very apologetic. But of course, we're still in lockdown. No one's going back into the office. The last thing they're worried about are, you know, kind of the work experience people, as they called them. And so I kind of faced a choice there. It was like, well, is this a sign? Do I drop this whole thing? Which was very, very depressing to think about. Or do I pivot? Do I try to find something else to do? What could I possibly do? And after being very depressed about it for a little while, eating a lot of homemade cinnamon rolls, because that was like my big lockdown project, I started thinking about what would even be possible while we're still in lockdown, while we're all at home, while I'm still trying to manage my kids and on the side my business and do all these things. And I had a friend who was a dance teacher. I had taken a bunch of classes with her. I had done some personal training with her for a while years ago. And she had set up her own business teaching retro dance and fitness a few years before. And I'm kind of just like flipping through Instagram one night, and all of a sudden I see her on an Instagram live doing her exercise classes from her living room. And I was like, oh, okay, online fitness. That is something that is booming during this period because everybody is home. So I sent her a message, and, I had told her what I was doing, and she had sort of made a joke before. She was like, oh, you can intern for me whenever you want. So I reached out to her. I was like, please, 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 let me help you. And she was so delighted to take me on and grateful because all of a sudden she had to change her entire business model almost overnight from teaching in classes around London to being online. And so she agreed to take me on as an intern for a little over a month. And my jobs were social media, helping her with her social media and like building posts and helping her set up her virtual fitness studio. So it involved a lot of researching what other studios were doing and taking dozens of classes at all of these different online fitness studios around the world, help her map out her market and get her competitive set and understand what was going on. So that one was a real lifesaver. I don't think I'm going to work in fitness again. It was fun. It was really fun. Yeah. But more than anything, it was a reason to get moving, to get up, even if I was just moving in my living room. And it made me feel like I still had some momentum to keep going with the project. And I needed that because everything felt so grim in those early days of lockdown. And so it just was such a relief to have something that was just for me. It wasn't teaching the kids. It wasn't running the business. It wasn't taking care of my husband. It was just this thing I was doing for myself. And that was in short supply, I think, during the pandemic, especially for a lot of parents. Then things started to open up again. And so in that beautiful period between our two big lockdowns in the UK, I managed to do 2 other internships. I worked for a contemporary art dealer in London, who's buying and selling contemporary painting and sculpture, which was, again, for someone who I had known, who I had reached out to cold and asked if he knew anything I could do. And he was kind of starting up dealing again after coming out of the first lockdown and needed some help. So I was delighted to do that. I would say, again, I'll do anything you need me to do. And then I went back to the Isle of Skye and I worked at a hotel and restaurant, a family-run place that is in a very, very beautiful location. And I did a rotation. I did restaurant, I did kitchen, I did front of house bar. They never let me do housekeeping, even though I asked. I think they saw how messy I was. They really people's rooms. I worked in the office. I kind of tried all of the different jobs there. Yeah, so those are my 4 internships.
Ooh, and tell me, what was it about the restaurant that was attractive to you?
I love to travel. I love eating out. I love good food. I love bad food also. I love McDonald's.
Me too.
And I loved the idea how a hotel in particular, whether it's a hotel or a motel or whatever it is like this place that you can be anybody you want to be. You don't have to be yourself. You're not tied to your own home. So this idea, I think that was really like very thematically aligned to everything I was doing, this idea that you could kind of escape from who you were. And this was a place that we had visited, that we loved as a family. We had spent some time there, years before, and hospitality just seemed like this really fascinating field. And I worked in a bar when I was in my early 20s. Otherwise, I had never really done, I never worked in a restaurant. I never worked in a hotel. And it seemed like maybe this is the thing I want to do. Maybe we need to buy like a crumbling castle and redo it and open a bed and breakfast in Scotland. And then we can like make a Netflix show after. Who knows? People are always making Netflix shows about opening a crumbling B&B, right? And and it was just a wonderful place. It was like a place I knew I was going to be really happy to spend time. And by the time I got to my 4th internship, I had enjoyed the other ones so much that this idea of like, oh, well, maybe I should go do this because it might be interesting and I'm going to learn a lot, but I'm probably going to really enjoy it. And it's going to be really different. It's much more physical than any job I had done in 2 decades. And so it was truly like such an eye-opening experience. I was so bad at it. That's the one I was the worst at, but I loved it so much.
And did you go in thinking, maybe I'll write a book about this?
So my friend Rebecca on that kind of very first weekend had sort of thrown that out as an offhand comment. She was like, yeah, you should do all these internships and write a book about it. And we were like, yeah, that would be great. But I had never written, I loved writing when I was younger. I hadn't written anything except stuff for work forever. But I knew that I wanted to record this period in time. I was an avid journaler when I was a kid, and through high school and college, I have these amazing records of what was going on in my head during that time. I still look back at them now, even the ones that embarrass me. I've given my daughter my old ones from when I was like a preteen, which she just thinks are the most hilarious things in the world. And so I knew that this was going to be special, and I knew I wanted to journal again, which I had not done that since having kids. Like I had not really taken pen to paper. I just hadn't had the time. And so I started when I was doing my first experience in New York. I just carried a notebook around with me everywhere. And I wrote everything down that was happening and what I was doing. And I would kind of sit in the evenings and write about my experience and just really for no one other than myself. And it was definitely in the back of my head, like maybe this would be like a creative writing project. But really the idea that I was ever going to be able to put together a whole book, much less get it published, it was like already I was like living this fantasy. That was like so much more of a fantasy I couldn't possibly imagine. And then when I got home from New York, and we were in lockdown and I hadn't worked out what I was going to do next yet. And my husband said to me, I think you should like write up something about this experience that you had. And I was like, no, I couldn't. It's too raw. I couldn't, the idea, it was painful, but it was honestly, I had put so much emotion into this experience. And then I went to New York and truly had just this, every single day was amazing. I loved all of it so much. And so reading back on how I was feeling when I was in the rehearsal room, when I was going to get coffees when I was at tech, was hard because I did not think it was going to happen again. Like I thought, as far as I knew, we were never going to be able to leave our houses ever again. But eventually I did decide to write about it and kind of put it in more of a narrative form and write a lot about what I was feeling at the time as well. And then when I did the second internship, I did the same thing. I journaled and I kind of did that. And then I did it for the third. And then when I got to the fourth, I was kind of like, I kind of have a story here. And now I think I know how the story is going to end. And now I need to go back and write everything again from the beginning. So it has been, everything that has happened with the book process has been like a surprise and a beautiful gift, because really at no point did I ever expect that it was going to be a physical book that I was going to be able to hold in my hands, that people were going to be able to buy. Like everything that's happening from that point on, everything has just been like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. It's been very exciting.
Oh, that just makes me think of magic. The magic that happens when we're willing to be brave and willing to be rejected, willing to be bold and go for and think about the what ifs, the positive what ifs.
I love thinking about it like magic. I mean, I think one of the big things that I realized at the end of all of these internships was that I had engineered so much of my life to stay away from failure, to keep myself out of situations where there was a high possibility of failure, because I did not like failing. I still don't like failing, but I fail a lot more now because I'm trying a lot more things. And part of this experience and trying all of these things and not being good at a lot of them, and then going through the process of writing a book and querying agents. I queried 41 agents before I signed with my agents. Like it was not like somebody just handed me a contract. And now I really try to intentionally put myself in situations where there is a high probability of failure, to do stuff that I know I may not be good at, or that, everything from stand-up paddleboarding, which I've just started doing, which like I have really bad coordination and horrible balance. Mostly I fall in the water, but when I don't fall in, I really enjoy it. Or I took an acting class the other day.
Oh, fun.
I am not a good actress, but that's okay because I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I tried it and that I had that experience. So, but I think that I realized how much of my life I had designed so I would never fail at anything. So I was set up for success all the time, and it meant that I had stopped growing. And I am so grateful for failure now, and really that is like the thing that I want to encourage other people to do with this book, to try things that you might fail at, because that is sometimes where you're going to find the richest experience, the most opportunity, the most growth.
I agree with that so much. And maybe it doesn't mean taking a year off, right? Maybe it's, like so inspiring. And I think what you're saying can apply to the paddleboarding, the stand-up paddleboarding, swimming. I was taking swimming lessons last year. And just jumping into the deep end was so scary. My 17-year-old swim instructor was like, come on, Lupe, you can do it. And I did it because, well, my 4-year-old was taking swim lessons, and I did it because I thought I have to show her that mom is willing to be scared too, and I'm willing to face my fears. And so it was like, I looked at it as a challenge of, probably going to belly flop. I'm probably going to be scared. I'm holding on tight.
I love it. I love it. So are you like an avid swimmer now?
No, but I can get across the like lap pool.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So putting ourselves in situations where we are going to fail, where we're training our brain. I think one of my therapists said there's something called exposure therapy where you start kind of exposing yourself and trying new things. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're saying here. It's like, that's where the magic happens. That's
Totally.
where the growth happens.
That is where the magic happens. And sometimes it's still a failure. I did the same thing with my kids, except they wanted to go to Ninja Warrior. Do you know that's like one of those places with all these inflatables, and you have to like climb up stuff and run up like an angled walkway. And I mean, just everything. I'm so bad. I'm terrified of getting injured because I'm very clumsy. And I couldn't imagine though taking them and being like, oh, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines, you know? And even my son was like, it's okay, Mom, you don't have to do it because you know, I know you don't really like this sort of thing. You're not really good at it. And I was like, well, now I do have to do it because
just because you said that.
Yeah, I want to show by example. Like, I know I'm not going to be good at this, but I'm going to try it
That's
anyway.
okay. Yeah.
And that's okay. And I have found so much more richness and depth. And as you say, magic in my life since I have started doing more of that. It is not easy, but if I find that I'm scared of something, I stop and I think, why? Why don't I want to do this? Why is it that I don't think this is a good idea? Is it truly not a good idea, like it's dangerous or something? Or is it just that I'm afraid? And then if it's just that I'm afraid, more richness and depth. And as you say, magic in my life since I have started doing more of that. It is not easy, but if I find that I'm scared of something, I stop and I think, why don't I want to do this? Why is it that I don't think this is a good idea? Is it truly not a good idea, like it's dangerous or something? Or is it just that I'm afraid? And then if it's just that I'm afraid, I'm trying to force myself to do it at least once. I'm never going back to Ninja Warrior ever again, but I did it once, and that's the important thing.
Oh, that's amazing. Alisha, thank you so much for being here today. Where can people find your book? I'm so excited to read it. Where can people learn more about you?
So my book will be available on February 7th, everywhere that books are sold. So certainly check out your local independent bookstore. If that is somewhere you like to buy books, they should have it. If they don't, ask them for it and make sure they get it in there. And you can keep up with what I'm doing on Instagram at Alisha F. Miranda or on my website, alishafmiranda.com.
This was so lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was such a fun conversation.